Hello and welcome to lecture 28, where I'll be showing you film noir film techniques, and it's mostly about lighting as well. You can imagine that in the 60s or even earlier in the 20s, I think, or they did not have colored TV. Yeah, you can't imagine, right? So what they had to do, they had to create lights which are really convincing to really sell the film. So they had to come up with several different film techniques to make the lights, to make the film, the picture more interesting. And I'll just want to show you a few images which we will be trying to recreate. So obviously we brushed up on 3-point lighting, which has a key and a strong rim light. And you can see in this setup here, in these images, there are different techniques used. And you can see them nowadays in colored film TV. You can see these techniques being used everywhere. So if you can master film noir lighting techniques, you are pretty good in the industry and you can really always create good lights. You can always sell the picture. So if we check the first image, this is just lit by a key light from the left, but it has a gobo on it. So this is very simple to recreate, but it's a very strong effect. And then we have a typical low key image where you have one key light which is placed really 90 degrees to the character, so it casts a shadow right over the bridge of the nose. What do we have here? So it has kind of two lights. So one is lighting up the character on the right, which is a strong key, but then on the inside you have also a key light and you have a top-down light. And which one is also interesting? So this one is interesting because this has a light which fills the background, and then there is like a light which just illuminates his face using a barn door filter, for instance. Alright, let's start off by creating a very strong image with this single light key light. So it looks very simple, and it actually is, but you still need to make it convincing. So you can see that the shadow is very long from the bridge of the nose and it's going right over the image, and it creates this little triangle just below his eye. And we will be trying to recreate this exact effect. We have our object here, which is an old guy from the 1600 or something. I'm not that good in history, but it's somewhere from that time, I would guess. Maybe 1800 is maybe a bit more accurate. But anyways, that's not the point of the lecture, so it's about lighting. So let's start off by create a light. We always start off with area lights, make them larger, more to fit the image. To fit the character, and because we want to have a strong shadow, we want to have a slightly smaller light to get sharper shadows. And let's just bring up the exposure to maybe 15, and just by doing that you can see what strong light we get. It's just lighting it from the front, and the rest is really dark and falling off into the abyss of nothing, which is very interesting. So let's start off by adjusting the beam, the spread, to maybe 0.2. So it's very angled, and let's play around with the soft edge, maybe 0.2, and make it round of 0.5. So it's more like a spotlight. Obviously we need to move it now. So let's just put it to the left and angle it towards our object. And now comes a bit trial and error. We need to place it really close, like from the top down, and get this triangle on his like this little light angle right here. So the most easy thing to do is to actually look through the light. Not sure if I can do that right here. So I think what I need to do is I need to drag it in here. So let's just move the light a bit more to the front, and definitely we need to put it upwards, and it still needs to go a bit more to the front, and it needs to be angled towards his face. So we are trying to, just to remember, we want to try to get this effect. So there's a triangle below his eye, and then it's a nice fill light. So let's just move it further around. So now we start to see something below his eye. So by angling the light down more, we can see we get that light effect. We can move it down a bit. So now we kind of get it. We can see that the nose is casting this longer shadow. So all we gotta do is play around with the placement of the light to get the exact same effect. We can also scale the light down a bit to get, like you can see now, bigger light, softer shadows, smaller light, really crisp and sharp shadows. Let's just move it a bit back and a bit more up. And now you can see it's not a one-to-one match, but it is very close to our reference image. And we can see now that we get this really dark outline and we get the nice triangle. To make it a better match, what we should do is rotate our object and then we kind of get it better. But just because it's a bit different, it's totally fine to do it like we just did. And we can just reduce the exposure by a tad because it's a bit strong. And this would be a really simple film noir lighting technique, which is essentially just one strong key light, which is a very low key shot. All right, for our next film noir, let's try something more like this. So this is our main character, which is kind of like a key light, which is filling in her facial nose eye area. We have a rim from the right and we also have a rim from the left. So first, to get it matching, what I want to do is I want to just rotate my object so it's kind of in a similar pose. So something like this should resemble this a bit better. So now what we want to do is let's just first focus on our rim light. I'm just using this area light, which we were just using before, and I'm just placing this behind our object and lighting him from the back. And I think it is more a top-down light, so let's bring it up higher and angle it down so it's facing him. Something like that. So this would be our rim from the left. We can boost up the exposure a bit. And now let's create the rim, which is a really sharp edge rim, which is only on her head. So let's create another light. We go to area lights, make this a bit larger, the same procedure as the other light, and just move it behind our character. And then obviously just rotate it so it's angled towards him and boost up the exposure to 15 and maybe just move it back a bit more. Move it up, smaller area, and just boost up the exposure a tad more. So now what we see is a very interesting looking edge. We definitely, it's on his head, it's on his cheeks, and it's on his shoulders. I think we still need to play around with the spread just to angle it a bit more, make it a bit softer edged, and we can actually just move it a bit more back. And we need to aim it a bit because we have a pretty tight spread. So let's see if this is angled. Yeah, it's pretty much towards him. As I said before, you can use an aim constraint to make it align better, but this should just do it. So now we have a strong rim on for both sides. So the only thing missing is our light, which is right in the center of the face of our object. So to get that working, there's now two techniques. We can use a area light with some light blockers, which we should do first, or we can use a spotlight with a barn door. I'm pretty sure that's what they used in this image here. They used a barn door to just light this little pocket of light in her face. But first, let's try to use a barn door, a area light to get the same effect going. So one more light, area light, scale it up, same deal as before. Move it into the same height as his head. Angle it the light a bit from coming from the right. Angle it, yeah, like this. So it's lit from the right. Make it smaller as well, and just bring up the exposure again. So 15, maybe 18, 17 exposure stops. So this is very strong now from the front, and it currently does not have any blockers. So this is what we want. So let's go in the spread, go maybe 0.3. For now, let's bring down the exposure a bit. And now let's see what we can do with the light filters. So let's just create a blocker, which is creating a box on default. And let's just see what happens if we place it on our object. So let's just bring it up towards his face. And what we should be getting now, if I bring up the density, our face should get darker, which it totally does. So this is kind of the inverse effect of what we want to create. So unfortunately, there's no inverse in here. But what we can do is we can either create several light blockers to have, let's say, what I mean by that is we can scale this one up, put it here, make it softer, make it larger in both axes like this. Right, so this would now block the light coming from the bottom up. And now we can create another blocker which does the same from the top down. So this is definitely one way of doing this. And we can just finish it off by creating another light blocker, which is transform 2, density to 1, height. Let's just scale it up first, move it up. So now we can see what's happening. We can place it better. And now what we just need to do is create a height edge, softer fall off, and move the light up. You can rotate it and move the bottom one up. So this is the one way of doing this. So obviously now our light exposure is a bit low because we are blocking lots of the light. So we can just boost it or play around with the fall off of the density of our blockers. So if I just boost it up, we can see now we get a nice and strong effect. So this is one way of doing it. I'm not a big fan of this because it does illuminate behind the boxes. So instead of using a box, what we can do now is actually use a plane. And what a plane does, it actually blocks the light. It's like a geometry. So whenever it's in front of our object, it's casting a big shadow. And I like this approach a lot better because you can make it really big and then just place it exactly as you want it. And the closer it goes to your object, the crisper the shadow. So if it's really close, you can see it's really sharp. And the further you may place it away from your object, the softer the light. And obviously for this to resolve, you would need in your key light to get a bit higher samples, maybe 4, and you get a really soft edge here. And now all we got to do is angle it maybe. First, let's move just this box out of the way and angle our plane. Maybe bring it a bit closer. Really soft edge there. And let's change the top one from box to plane as well. And do the same thing as we just did. Bring it a bit closer to our object. And this is exactly the same deal as we did on the lower plane. So it's just about aligning it to get a very interesting shape. Something like this. So this is obviously blocking lots of light, but this is something, yeah, which we want to do. So now we can just boost our area light again. And we kind of have a very similar effect as this is. It's just a bit more noisy, but this is kind of what we were trying to achieve. So the last technique I want to show you is something like this, which is actually using a gobo filter to create these nice defined shadow lines. So to do that, let me just for now delete let's just save this, store this image quickly, and just delete those lights, or actually let's just hide them and delete the blockers. And for now, just hide these area lights. And if we rotate our object towards the left, just to get something more interesting, let's create a light, this time a spotlight actually. So lights spotlight, which is a Maya light, but any package, any software should have a spotlight. So just make use of that, scale it up, move it to the front, and let's just introduce some exposure under the Arnold tab. Let's go maybe 10, 15, and now we can see that we get a spotlight. And what I want to do is I want to angle it from the left. So I'm just moving it over and rotating it so it's kind of more like a side lit light, like that. And then what we can do is we can play around with the cone angle so it's tighter. You can see how crisp it is. You can also use this actually for just getting a soft portion around the face. So you could also use a spotlight. There are definitely lots of techniques to get the same or a similar result. So let's bring up the cone angle a bit and just have a softer penumbra angle, and maybe scale it down and bring up the exposure. All right, so this is now our key light direction. And what I want to do now is I want to go to light blockers or light filters and add a AI gobo. So if I head over to that node, and you can see there's a slide map. And what I want to do is connect an image to this. So I want to create an AI image texture node. And I want to load in an image, which is under source files. And it is gobo blind. So this is what it looks like. It's a black and white image with these blinds. So if I load this up, you can immediately see what we get. We get these lines from our light source. So obviously these are parallel to the light. So if you want to have them more angled, we can move them up and angle our light down so they have a bit more pattern to it. And in the gobo itself, you can play around with the density, how strong it is. You can actually, because I think it looks like it's a bit colored. It's because it's going into the slide map color itself, so it might be that there's some color saturation to it. You can scale it up in both axes if you want to have a smaller or bigger slide map. On default, this is what you get, and it looks pretty similar to something like these reference images like here or like this. And the only thing missing is obviously our strong rim light again. And I think because in this image here, he's opening up the blinds, so he doesn't have any shadows in his face. But for now, we just want to ignore that and just focus on our rim light. So let's just unhide this light here, maybe this one actually, unhide it, and we already should have our rim light. Maybe make it a bit softer and larger, and just move it a bit around our subject, like that. And this is kind of a simple film noir technique as well. You can see that we have a very strong shadow here, and this is because our spotlight has no radius. We should definitely change that by boosting it up to maybe 2, 10, and you can see the larger I make the radius, the softer this shadow here gets. So you can actually go pretty high depending on what light you're using. And around the nose, you can see it's soft. You can see now this is a lot softer everywhere. We can also try to boost it up a tad more. So let's go to exposure. Let's just go with 19. So this is kind of the effect. And obviously currently we don't have any backdrop, or we have one, but it's dark. So let's just unhide this area light and use this one to light our backdrop. So let's just angle this upwards and just move it towards the backdrop like this. Move it down and maybe up. And I just want to check quickly if the light has color to it, like our filter. So this is the gobo. Let's see what is in here. So this gets the slide map from the color. And what I want to do now is I just want to create a color correct node before it goes into the gobo. So let's just connect these two guys up and see if I desaturate it, if it actually gets rid of the red. And it totally does. So you can see that the image I was using was actually colored, and it did give us a red slide map. So, but just by doing this, we can definitely play around with our input images. We can play around with the contrast to make it a more black and white map, like stronger contrast. We can play around with the pivot, so it's really contrasty and we get these really strong shadows. And if this is then too much, you can go to the gobo and play around with the density in general and really have a play with what you want to create. So let's just bring down the contrast so it's not that crazy. I think this could work. So let's just render this image and see what we get. All right, so now we have our final image with the blinds for this lecture, and I think it is a pretty successful render. So at first we had this image, which is a 2 rim light setup with one key light, which is illuminating the face. And then the other one was a similar one, which has 1 rim light and 1 key with some gobo effect on it. So by showing you these two techniques to light your scene, I hope I could show you ways to make your lights more interesting. And always a very good reference is Google. Go there, search for images, look for references, and just to try stuff out, make it look better, try different techniques. You can also, instead of using images, you can actually use geometry as gobo. So you could use you just could model a plane, or you could model some interesting patterns just to get different shadows. You can use leaves to create some, you can animate leaves, so you can use fog or whatever. There's so many techniques. You can do this endlessly. So I hope I could show you more ways to create interesting lighting effects. And always a good thing is to use colors. You can see like colors in images just produce so much more, give more story to the picture. So thank you guys for watching this lecture, and this sums up the lighting techniques, and I will see you in the next section.